Well, in the wake of this week's stunning events surrounding the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., crowing Democrats are out for Donald Trump's blood again. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi has given the Vice President an ultimatum: replace the President or the House will vote on another effort to impeach him.
I join the Senate Democratic leader in calling on the Vice President to remove this President by immediately invoking the 25th Amendment.
Now, that changed the tune in Republican circles dramatically, with firstly White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany denouncing the violence from yesterday, but she wasn't keen on taking questions.
Those who are working in this building are working to ensure an orderly transition of power. Now it is time for America to unite, to come together, to reject the violence that we have seen. We are one American people under God. Thank you very much.
And soon enough, the President himself emerged, no longer describing those who stormed the Capitol as special.
To those who engaged in the acts of violence and destruction, you do not represent our country. And to those who broke the law, you will pay.
But what people aren't focusing on is the fact that Joe Biden has been certified as the President-elect. So what can the world expect, including Australia, from this 78-year-old leader of the free world from January 20? I spoke with political historian and Emeritus Professor Ross Fitzgerald today about the new administration. Ross Fitzgerald, what can we expect from the President-elect Joe Biden?
Well, given what's happened in the last couple of days, Donald Trump's really done him a great service, because now the Democrats will hold the majority in the Senate, and it'll make much easier for Biden to pass through legislation. The interesting thing is how long he'll stay on as president. And when he came here in Australia in 2016, he seemed about ready for retirement. So it's hard to know how compos mentis he is. But I don't think he'll be doing anything. He'll be rather like an Obama light, to coin a phrase. That I don't think he'll be doing anything particularly helpful, especially in terms of foreign policy. I don't think he'll be taking on China about Hong Kong, or later on about Taiwan.
What about spending? What about some of those policies we heard during the election campaign? $1 trillion for climate change, a lot of emphasis on welfare, and he'll have pressure to introduce some quite left-wing style policies. Do you see that happening?
Yes, certainly. Although he looked like a centrist, he's under a great deal of pressure to have big spends in a whole lot of areas, which can't really do America much good in the long term. So I'm not particularly optimistic about a Joe Biden presidency. But the interesting thing will be what role the Vice President plays. And also the Republicans are now in a very difficult situation, given the behaviour of that terrible behaviour on Capitol Hill that Trump really organised. And in a way, many Republicans are on the nose at the moment. It'll be interesting to see if the Vice President stands for the Republicans in the next American election.
Yes, very true, because Mike Pence, I think, excelled this week. But you look at someone like Kamala Harris, as you've just mentioned, if Joe Biden doesn't go through to the full term, we could see her step up to the plate and play a significant role as the first female president.
Yes, certainly. She'd be the first female president, but she'd be a very radical Democrat. Not a centrist like Biden. And she'd be under a whole lot of pressure from various constituencies to spend up big, to make all sorts of reforms and so on. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if she takes over as president in the next couple of years.
The Prime Minister has indicated that a Joe Biden presidency and administration would be an advantage to Australia. I couldn't see any of that being derailed, could you?
No. But the Prime Minister of Australia, whoever he or she is, has always got on pretty well with whoever the American president has been, whether they be Democrat or Republicans.
Ross, can I also pick your historical brain about the Spanish flu of 100-odd years ago and the comparisons that might be able to be drawn between what the world and Australia experienced then and what we're experiencing now? To give people an idea, it was far more devastating 100 years ago, wasn't it?
It certainly was. The 1918-1919 influenza pandemic killed throughout the world almost 100 million people. It was known as the Spanish flu, not because it originated in Spain, but because the King of Spain was one of the most high-ranking casualties. In Australia, about 13,000 died, but because we're an island continent, as is the case with COVID-19, our per capita death rate was lower than almost any other country in the world. It's certainly true that some of our returned soldiers brought it back towards the end of the war. And it's certainly true that the Australian health systems at the time, because we were a group of states, as we still are, was woefully inadequate. But some states performed much better than others, particularly New South Wales in 1918, 1919, which I think is true of New South Wales at the moment.
People are talking about the fact that we get to, say, 2022 and we've got this thing licked, so that would be a 2-year passage of time. How long did the Spanish flu last for?
Well, the real pandemic lasted for a bit over a year. I mean, the absolute strong pandemic was towards the end of 1918 through 1919. It just depends how you count, but I think that the worst period was between 1918 and 1919. And as I said, over almost 100 million people died globally. And only 13,000 Australians died in 1918, 1919 of the influenza.
As I understand it, masks were very much in vogue back then as well.
Masks were very much in vogue back then, as were lockdowns, as were different policies by different states. And some states performed noticeably better than others, New South Wales in particular.
We benefit now, and we benefited 100-odd years ago from the fact that we are an island and we are contained and we are on the other side of the world. We should be thanking our lucky stars for that.
We certainly should be thanking our lucky stars that we're an island continent, which prevents most of the dreadful pandemics that we've seen over the last 100 years from taking hold in Australia in a way that it took hold in many other countries in the world. Our per capita deaths from the Spanish flu were the lowest of almost any country in the world. And it's true now that Australia's death rates per capita are very, very small in comparison with other countries, Chris.
Yeah. Ross Fitzgerald, thank you very much for your time. It's a fascinating look at what we're experiencing now and how it applies 100 years ago. Thank you for your time.